Hello and welcome to Fantasy Life Show. Happy Monday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down and, some might say overreact to all the business that went down on an eventful NFL Sunday. So joining me on this edition of the Fantasy Life Show, Paul Charchian, Chris Allen. The boys are back. And Paul, the Vikings are still undefeated. Good for you, man.
Yeah, good. And surprising fashion, a dominating performance in the first half. Then they let the Packers right back in it in the second half. A little bit of a nail biter, but nobody expected Sam Darnold to be in the MVP conversation right now.
What a time to be alive. I said yesterday the happiest fan bases in the NFL might be Washington, Minnesota, and Buffalo. Already jinxed one of those. But hey, at least Minnesota and Washington. Good things going on. Chris, the Bengals beat the Panthers. Congrats, I think.
Yeah, I'll take it for right now. At least for my mental health's sake, I'm able to get through the next 3 to 4 days without too many issues. But other than that, we're doing well in Southwest Ohio. So yeah, let's enjoy the win for right now. But then once we think about what Derrick Henry might do to us, that's when things might change. But other than that, I'm doing all right.
God's country up here in the Midwest. Gotta love that. And gotta love the fine services we offer with Fantasy Life Plus. Guys, Fantasy Life Plus is our premium package over here at Fantasy Life, just trying to help make you a few percentage points smarter in the glorious pastime known as fantasy football. So from our consensus ranks to Dwayne McFarland's utilization, just overall report hub, to everything else in terms of just waiver wire and start sit tools, just trying to help you guys, again, get one step closer to that fantasy football championship. So tier 1 package under $40 per year. Tier 2 still not going over, I believe, $10 per month. Hard to top that. So Fantasy Life Plus, check it out. Fellas, it was an eventful Sunday. As always, a lot of good things happened, but also the injury gods had to strike us down again, most notably with arguably the wide receiver one the rest of the season in Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice being feared to have suffered a torn ACL. Charch, this one sucks.
Yep, as always, look, this is part of the game. We accept that, but always sad to see, and obviously we hope for a quick, successful recovery for Rashee Rice and his career. People are going to try to tell you that Xavier Worthy's value skyrockets on this news. Do not believe it. When bad things happen to the offense, it affects everybody negatively more often than not. And unless Worthy develops a much broader skill set than what he's got right now, which is basically run straight and run fast, this is going to overall really limit the entirety of the Chiefs' offense. Rashee Rice made some of those deep strikes to Worthy possible because he forced defenses to collapse down to the line of scrimmage where he gets all those quick passes that would come to him. Defenses had to respect that short part of the field. Without Rashee Rice, I don't think that's the case anymore. Again, I don't think there are any winners here. Rice was, by a big margin, the only reliable Kansas City wideout, and he leaves behind a massive 34% target rate. Again, I just don't think you take that out of an offense and think the rest of the offense gets better. And it's compounded by the fact that who's going to walk into that role? I mean, really, don't have anybody who can do what Rashee Rice did. Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore. I don't feel good about putting any of those guys into my lineup here. I just think it's all bad news, I'm afraid.
The short-term answer on Sunday was Travis Kelce catching 7 of 9 targets for 89 yards. But Chris, man, we kind of saw last season what these Kansas City wide receivers look like when Rashee Rice didn't have a full-time role. And yeah, spoiler, wasn't good.
No, and I would say that for right now, I'm completely with Charch on the idea that we shouldn't be just rushing to the waiver wire to pick up Juju Smith-Schuster, Justin Watson, Sky Moore, who's still dropping balls left, right, and center. None of those guys, I think, really warrant the type of attention that would be a wide receiver catching passes from Patrick Mahomes. Let me go pick them up. Because to Charch's point, I mean, Rashee Rice was 8th in yards after catch, per reception. I mean, so from a efficiency standpoint, while yes, some of the targets might go to some of the other pass catchers on the offense, there's nobody that can replicate the same amount of efficiency, getting them into manageable third downs, being able to create or to be able to convert third downs, things of that nature. There's nobody on that team that can do that, outside of Travis Kelce. So, and I would say the other thing that kind of looms large is, what are the Chiefs thinking about, from a trade perspective? I mean, this is a team that's still undefeated at this point. Probably has, I would assume they still have aspirations of playing late into January and early February. So there's going to have to be some sort of roster move that has to coincide with this injury, or at least what we assume to be a long-term injury, like for Rashee Rice. So if there's some sort of trade deadline maneuver that's going to be for the Chiefs, the assumption would be for a wide receiver, but one of a caliber that would displace these pass catchers that we're thinking about investing in now. So as I'm looking at it, there's nobody that can replace Rashee Rice like that's currently in Kansas City. And if one comes in from outside of Kansas City, I want nothing to do with the rest of the guys that are currently on the roster.
Church, I don't know about you, man. I got one name sticking out in my mind. Maybe that hamstring injury is real. Maybe it's not.
All right. Well, I've got a name as a trade candidate. I'll let you go first. Who do you got?
Devontae Adams.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? I mean, that'd be an ideal scenario. I don't know. Can the Chiefs just pick up that contract? I mean, he's paid so much money. Yeah. I mean, look, that would be fantastic, and I would love to see Devontae Adams play with Patrick Mahomes. So let's bring that on. I'm going to give you what I think is a more realistic trade target, and it's not as exciting, but it's somebody who can play the slot and has a similar physical build and is dirt cheap on a team that's not going to the playoffs. Jonathan Mingo. Xavier Legette is clearly the next guy up, right? And Mingo, we're talking early second round draft pick last year, so there's some equity there. He got a bunch of reps from the slot when Adam Thielen went down last week. Maybe Mingo's got, I'm just trying to find a realistic scenario. He's got that bigger, thicker body like Rice has got. Maybe he could pick up some of that. I know he hasn't done anything, but just realistically, he costs you like a fifth rounder or something, and you could plug him in. So it's not as exciting as Devontae Adams. It's just.
I was about to say, I think I maybe got Chiefs fans a little bit more excited there. Realistically, maybe we see Kendrick thrown in there, something like that. But for now, guys, Juju Smith-Schuster, probably the name to grab, but, overarching point here, most likely answer to which Chiefs wide receiver you want on your fantasy roster rest of the season, probably just no. Did have some other injuries, around the league that aren't worth mentioning. Primarily, guys, sadly, Jonathan Taylor diagnosed with a mild high ankle sprain. Bit of an oxymoron there, but I guess good news that it's not the most serious high ankle sprain in the world. Continue to keep an eye on that. Going to be Trey Sermon's show, at least on early downs in Indianapolis moving forward. Anthony Richardson also dealing with a hip injury. Not expected to miss too much, if any time, though. So it looks like the Colts did indeed dodge a bullet there, unless you're their wide receivers, where you would probably prefer Joe Flacco. Yes, to Charch's point right there. So also, more high ankle news. We did have Jordan Schultz report that Packers wide receiver Christian Watson suffered a high ankle sprain. Going to be Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, and of course Romeo Dawes with just a sprinkle of Bill Melton in the meantime. And then also we have Taysom Hill with an abdomen, Tyler Budday with a back injury, and our one true king Cordero Patterson sadly dealing with an ankle. So keep an eye on those throughout the week. But fellas, the other big news to get to is just a pretty fun Sunday night game, at least for the Ravens fans involved. It was a 35-10 beatdown over the Buffalo Bills, and charge death, taxes, and our one true king, Derrick Henry, putting up big numbers in primetime.
That rebuilt Ravens offensive line, if you go back to week 1, looked all discombobulated, all the moving parts. They couldn't open any lanes. Got a little bit better in week 2, dominated in week 3, and just kept piling up defenders. Bills had no answer for Derrick Henry. This was a fantastic outing for just Henry rambling through defenses. The Bills entered this game giving up the second most yards before contact. And when Derrick Henry gets that head of steam going before anybody gets a hand on him, good night, it's over. And how about this? Henry on that long touchdown run, 21.5 miles per hour. Are you kidding me? Outrunning defensive backs. Oh, man, Derrick Henry just looking so comfortable in this offense. For all of us that wondered, either privately or aloud, perhaps even on the show in the offseason, if Derrick Henry was cooked, I think we can safely say no was the answer to that.
Only ball carriers tracked with a faster speed this season per Next Gen Stats: Nico Collins, Saquon Barkley, Xavier Worthy, and Jerome Ford. And the fact Derrick Henry's carrying, an extra 40, 50 pounds over most of those guys, just extra, impressive. So, Chris, at this point in time now, Derrick Henry averaging a career best 6 yards per carry, 120 rushing yards per game. It's his highest since 2020 when he went for over 2,000. Turns out Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry in the same backfield is quite a problem for opposing defenses. Who would have thought?
Yeah, who'd have thunk it? Almost in the same vein of, oh, you stick a better ball carrier in Saquon Barkley behind like the Eagles offensive line, and lo and behold, they're creating explosives and having still an efficient running game. Better talent like behind in a good offense. Like, who'd have thought that this would work out? But yeah, I'm completely with you guys. I was one of those people that at least had some concern about what Derrick Henry would look like in this offense, just given like his career, the number of touches he had like while he was in Tennessee. But with the way that Todd Monken has really like shifted the offense, I wouldn't say completely shifted the offensive identity, but at least worked it so that Henry is a featured part of that offense, and it's less of the passing game. I mean, I'm sure folks that roster Mark Andrews are still complaining about like where things are at with him, but the running game's still working as it should. I mean, this should be a rushing attack that we should fear from both a real and fantasy perspective for the rest of the season.
Derrick Henry, not the only running back doing big things for the Ravens. Last night, we did have Justice Hill catch 6 passes for 78 yards and a touchdown. No other Ravens pass catcher had more than 3 targets. Yeah, Mark Andrews now has not caught a single pass since week 2. Good luck to any poor souls, trying to deal with him in guillotine leagues right now. On the Bills side of the football, 10 points certainly didn't get much fantasy production, but really was brutal. As cool as that pass by Josh Allen was as he was falling out of bounds, guys, just 7.3 fantasy points. That was his lowest single game mark over the past 5 seasons. So again, far more good than bad in Buffalo so far this year, but at least on Sunday night wasn't too pretty for Bills Mafia. But upward and onward, we are on to week 5. But first, guys, a quick word to our friends over at Experian. Experian is to your finances what FantasyLife is to your fantasy league. It is a tool and resource designed to make your life easier. And accordingly, the Experian app is free to download and serves as a one-stop shop for managing your financial health. Because with so many split spending and subscription details to track, let Experian handle it for you. They'll help you find and cancel your unwanted or forgotten subscriptions, helping you save money and focus on what really matters, winning your fantasy league. Download the Experian app today. Just note that results will vary. Not all subs are eligible. Savings not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account is required, and see Experian.com for details. Fellas, it's Monday, which means it is time to panic about some of the biggest storylines coming out of, again, another fun Sunday of NFL action. So, Chris, I'll start with you here. Can Aaron Rodgers actually power this Jets offense? Because Lord knows Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall have not been doing that lately.
I think so, but it's just not in the way that we need him to. And I think that's the problematic part for fantasy managers, because the way that we expected him to is it would be through Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. And specifically, Garrett Wilson is the guy that I want to talk about, because he was a first round pick for most folks, along with Breece Hall. And we can see at least the offensive line like being something of an issue, and like part of why like Breece Hall hasn't been at least creating fantasy production the way that we expected him to. But for Garrett Wilson, that's, I think, more of a problem. Right now, through the last through 4 weeks, I mean, the target share, targets per route run, I mean, those the volumetric statistics that we typically look for wide receivers, those have been there for Garrett Wilson. So the opportunities have been there, but the efficiency has been down. But also the fact that they've also added in Mike Williams, Braylon Allen's getting involved. Breece, of course, is getting his. I mean, the target share it isn't condensing around a wide receiver like Garrett Wilson like we would want it to. Like last year alone, Garrett Wilson was still averaging around 8 to 9 targets per game, and that was fine. I mean, everybody else from who was on the team Last year, it was Michael Carter, Randall Cobb. I mean, Tyler Conklin was getting some of his. But the rest of the guys, they were averaging about 20 per game. This year, Garrett Wilson's still getting his. So as I mentioned, around the same amount of targets. But still, the rest of those guys, I mean, they were getting around for last year was around about 20. This year, last year was 15. So it's that difference in targets. Those guys taking 1, 2, 3, 4 targets away from Garrett Wilson, and also the fact that he's not getting as many looks from the slot. I mean, that's where he runs into more of those elite coverage corners like Patrick Surtain. He's not really getting as many of those layup targets that we need to. All that is kind of leading to the fact that I would be worried about Garrett Wilson, especially if you have, I would say, a less than stellar play caller like Nathaniel Hackett, pulling the one offense. So for right now, I'm not convinced that Aaron Rodgers is at least capable of powering this offense, at least the way that we need him to for fantasy.
Charge, Chris mentioned some of the tough matchups and how, again, this isn't all on Garrett Wilson, someone who I continue to believe is a very talented wide receiver. But at the same time, I look at the fantasy points per game leaderboard and I see the Raiders The freaking Raiders have not one, not two, but 3 wide receivers with more PPR points per game than Garrett Wilson. I mean, at what point, Paul, do we say that Garrett Wilson, he's averaging wide receiver 4 numbers? He's always kind of been doing that. Maybe he's a wide receiver 4.
Yeah, it's possible we were just wrong about Garrett Wilson and our evaluation on him, and that, you know, so was his, and maybe his draft position by the Jets was wrong as well. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers to me is a problem. I don't like what I've seen. And I don't necessarily have the kind of metrics that can back this up, but, and by the way, he's only 4 games into his rebirth here in New York. So, you know, he's got the right to get better. But when I'm watching Aaron Rodgers, this whole offense feels a beat slow. His decision-making feels just a hair off. His release feels a hair slow. The ball speed just doesn't seem the same. It all feels a little bit slow. And compounding matters. This isn't just, it's not a very fast team anyway. You know, we got a lot of burners on this squad. And then after Garrett Wilson, you know, what are the other real receiving threats on this team? People that can make something special happen after the catch? I don't know. Maybe nobody. I know Tyler Conklin might be the next best guy up. I don't know. The undead corpse of Alan Lazard. Williams dragging one leg behind him while he's trying to go downfield. I mean, there's just this, the whole operation with this Jets offense feels off. And of course, your trigger man's going to be the first person we're all going to look at. It's Aaron Rodgers. He's not bad. I mean, we've watched Will Levis. We know what bad looks like, but it's just not crisp and fast with Aaron Rodgers right now.
I mean, he's averaging a career low 6.6 yards per attempt, 212 yards per game, to Church's point. Really, other than that Thursday night game against the Patriots, has been tough sledding for this entire Jets offense. Does include Breece Hall when you look at him. I mean, just the RB 46 so far in week 4. And look, guys, only averaging 3.1 yards per carry, 6th lowest mark in the NFL. And yes, guess what? Offensive line, major problem with that. But similar to Tampa Bay, you know, when I do see an RB1 struggling in the yards per carry and his backup, Braylon Allen, you know, Bucky Irving, they're both doing a lot better in the same situation. I do have to start asking a few more questions there. So overall panic level on the Jets, yeah, guys, not exactly looking great for 2 guys who we spent early round 1 picks on just a few short weeks ago. Let's move on, though. Chris, we're still panicking. And speaking of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, can we even start Rachaad White or Bucky Irving in a Bucs backfield that sure looks like a pretty evenly split timeshare?
No, I couldn't. If you're rostering Bucky Irving, this is what you wanted to see. This is what you were hoping we would get at some point, would be that 50-50 type of split between Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Like coming into this season, we talked about this last week. I mean, Rachaad White was one of the least efficient backs, like from a rushing standpoint, just last season. Back into the league in rush yards over expectation, forced missed tackle rate, like insert metric here, and you would see White down at the bottom. That's been the same case like for the first 3 weeks. And with the explosive level of Bucky Irving, him coming in and being the more efficient back like through 3 weeks, we would hope that we would see at least some sort of shift in the workload between the two of them. And just on Sunday, I mean, 6 touches like for Irving, like in the once they got into the red zone, he was already the more successful, the more efficient rusher, like on early downs from a rushing success rate. 66 of Bucky Irving's like rushing attempts were graded out as being a successful play. All of that to say that this is what we wanted. It's probably going to take some time before they even like make that type of move. But at least if you're looking at Irving from like you've got him on your bench and you've been holding him like for that type of moment, it's good to see him force it early versus us having to try and see like, okay, well, is it going to be in week 8, 9, 10? I mean, it's week 4 and he's already pushing this type of timeshare between him and Rachaad White. Give it a couple more weeks, and the hope would be that this starts now to shift into more of a workload like for a guy like Irving, who has been so not just efficient but also explosive. And it's kind of something that the Bucs need at this point.
Charge, right now, both guys are top 24 running backs pre-Monday Night Football in week 4. Hey, I mean, Buccaneers 10th ranked scoring offense, so that's not the worst thing ever. We're about to get some bye weeks where, yeah, we'll take that production, we can have it. But do you think at the end of the day, either Rachaad White or Bucky Irving are going to pull away and make this more of a one-man show?
I'm with Chris. We always want it to happen fast in fantasy. We want to be like, bang, let's make that change right now. And coaches are always so much slower than we are. You know, we look at all the metrics and we're like, oh, come on, make this change. It's happening slowly. I think Chris is 100% correct that it's probably like a mid-season thing. But I thought the most important thing that came out of yesterday's game, the touches from inside the 5. Irving had a carry at the 3-yard line. He had a carry from the 2-yard line. They called it a touchdown, but then on review, they reversed it back. Then he got the next carry at the 1-yard line. He punched it in. Like, that's what we want to see. Who loves touchdowns? We love touchdowns. I love the fact that Irving's getting the ball near the goal line. In an ideal world, Irving turns into like the 70-30 guy on this thing, and Rachaad White turns into really just a third down back, somebody that's primarily is in a pass catching role and a change of pace runner. But that's, that might be a while off if it ever happens that way, but clearly trending the right way for Irving, who I think at this point right now, probably a flex level starter every week going forward, unless something changes, unless this reverses course.
It is a great point because of Bucky and really any sub 200-pound running back, we're always wondering, can they actually have that short yardage, that goal line role if given the opportunity? And so far on the season, Bucky 3 carries inside the 5-yard line and Rachaad White just 1. So honestly, guys, don't look now, but Baker Mayfield looking like one of the more, explosive rushers out there. Had some nice plays against the Lions. And again, last week, shaking and bacon is right. So, all right, guys, we'll see what happens in Tampa. At a minimum, though, both of these guys, one injury away to the other from really booming up those fantasy ranks in a hurry. Let's talk everyone's favorite tight end now. Charge, we'll start with you. Was, the real Kyle Pitts season simply the friends we made along the way? Because let's face it, what we see in 2024, pretty rough so far.
Yeah, we were talking about Garrett Wilson and maybe we were just wrong. In the history of the fantasy football industry, have we ever been more conclusively and extensively fooled by any player more than Kyle Pitts? I mean, here we are. It's year 4. We're still clinging to the belief that Kyle Pitts is a special talent when nobody has been able to unlock that yet. We entered the draft. We all loved his prospects as a rookie draft candidate. And then we got dangerous confirmation bias when the Falcons took him at pick 4. Behind, by the way, Zach Wilson and Trey Lance, who were very ready to talk about his shortcomings, no problem. But when Pitts has his failings, no, it's never Kyle Pitts. It's always it's Arthur Smith for 3 long years, not using him very well. Now look at what we've got out of a whole new regime with Kyle Pitts. He's 18th in yards for tight ends. He's 24th in receptions. The only reason he's been even remotely fantasy relevant is he does have 1 touchdown at the position, which in the tight end world right now is pretty good. But this second whole new offense isn't utilizing him either. So at some point, maybe Kyle Pitts just is O.J. Howard or Eric Ebron or an even number of first-round tight ends that just aren't as good as we want them to be in real life. That's the possible scenario that we don't want to accept, but I think it's on the table now.
Chris, it's like that meme of the kid looking at himself in the mirror going, it's not your fault for, starting Kyle Pitts. It's the Falcons' fault for not using them right. But to Charch's point, man, starts to ring a little bit hollow after, 4 years of the same old stuff.
Yeah, because you'd think that with his size, stature, athletic capability, all the things that we saw when he popped at the combine, it was just get the ball in his hands and let him just do stuff afterwards. I mean, shoot, was everybody freaking out about Darnell Washington hopping over a dude yesterday? So it's if we're thinking about what could happen if you just give the tight end a massive tight end, the runway to run after the catch, but then 2 with the athletic nature to actually just be an athlete for a second, then that's what you would think for Kyle Pitts, but they're not even doing that for him. They're still using him as the traditional wideout, not really moving him into the slot as much as we would like. I mean, we've seen more design looks for guys like Ray-May McCloud on the team than Kyle Pitts. So at this point, I'm kind of with you guys that it's just the team is telling us something that we're not willing to accept right now. But I think at this point, it's kind of I think it might be over for Kyle Pitts.
Turns 24 next Sunday, still a very young man. Maybe things can change, but at least for right now, guys, certainly worth downgrading in the old fantasy ranks. And maybe time to give Arthur Smith an apology, guys. Second straight coaching staff that's using Tyler Algier a bit more than we expected. And Kyle Pitts, 3.8 targets this season. He had 6.5, 5.9, and 5.3 per game from 2021 to 2023. So not great for Kyle Pitts. And, all this talk about disappointment has me wanting a little something. Maybe a Mike's Hard Lemonade? What a transition. Fantasy football season is here, and while that may be cause for celebration, there will be some hard days ahead. That said, guys, Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. So after a hard day spent scouring the waiver wire, concocting the perfect trade, tinkering endlessly with your starting lineup, or maybe just reading Kyle Pitts' game logs, it is time to quench your hard-earned thirst with a Mike's Hard Lemonade. All right, guys. We were panicking before, things weren't great. That said, now we're going to focus on some good things and decide if maybe they are just here to stay with some week 4 stud overreactions. So, Chris, when I say the Commanders offense is the best thing we have seen literally since, the Saints offense in weeks 1 through 2, do you think that is an overreaction?
No, not an overreaction at all. I mean, if you want to look at like the quarterbacks like so far through 4 weeks that have been able to be one of the more like efficient passers in the league, and this is not just from a like dinking and dunking type of standpoint, it's actually like throwing the ball downfield, being aggressive. I mean, Jaden Daniels is up at the top of the list in almost every single metric. I mean, this is the same offense like for the first 2 weeks. We thought that hat tip to Lord Reeves, like this was more the horizontal raid was back. I mean, all the aggressive tendencies that we saw from Jaden Daniels throughout his collegiate time out at LSU, all that was gone. I mean, dead last in air yards per attempt, throwing short of the sticks in obvious passing situations, like those things were just like littered across all of the metrics for Jaden Daniels for the first 2 weeks. Now it just took like one matchup against like my Bengals in order for him to figure out like, I can actually throw the ball downfield and catch, have Terry McLaurin catch a few passes in order for him to figure that out. Which, again, that hurts me. But still, like that was still the case here in week 4. So now he's not just one of the more efficient passers, but he's still one of more of the efficient runners. I mean, the number of first downs he's been able to generate as a rusher, first in the league. EPA per scramble, first in the league. And so we're getting all the like Lamar Jackson stuff that we expected, but now we're just getting a guy that's still able to uncork that deep ball on a week-to-week basis. So I don't see how this Washington Commanders team can get stopped at any point.
Church, right now, I would say Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I'd probably take over Daniels the rest of the season. And is that it?
That is about it right there. Tip of the hat to the Commanders coaching staff and Cliff Kingsbury. Like if they had decided for whatever reason that they were going to keep last year's Commanders staff, this was like a Rivera Bieniemy operation. No way are we talking like this. Cliff Kingsbury's done a fantastic job here. Chris alluded to the fact that it was a lot of short passes in the first couple of weeks. That was building some confidence for a young passer and just getting him into rhythm and just getting the ball out. And he started passing downfield these last 2 weeks, and he looks great. Get this. I think everybody has probably already seen the stat, and Chris alluded to this as well. Jaden Daniels just set the all-time completion percentage record for any quarterback's first 4 games at 82%. But on deep passes of 15 or more yards, Jaden Daniels ranks number 1 in completion percentage. Number 1. This is staggering development for a 4th start rookie. Then, and a lot of it's about Daniels, but also Brian Robinson is sculpted differently this year. He is leaner. He is stronger. I love what I've seen from him. Austin Eckler had been a terrific addition to this season. And then he bows out, and Jeremy McNichols just walks right into that role, scores 2 touchdowns. Like, if this team can unearth a second wideout, I don't know who that is yet. Maybe that's our Jonathan Mingo destination. Or maybe this is KJ Osborne. Maybe the Patriots are going to get rid of one of their 4 slot wide receivers. If they can find a second wideout, look out, because this offense is going to go nuclear. It's very, very impressive right now, and it has the potential to get even better.
Commanders NFL high 80 points over these past 2 weeks. That's 13 more than the second place Bengals. So even more impressive, guys, that Jaden Daniels has been able to do this without learning behind Jacoby Brissett to start the season, because just didn't even know something like that was possible. Let's talk about another stud overreaction, Chris. A big day on Sunday for one Justin Fields with his 31.98 fantasy points. He now holds the league high mark at the position in a single game this season. So, Chris, Justin Fields, top 5 fantasy quarterback moving forward?
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, did I forget to start him in a guillotine league or something like that? I mean, that's entirely possible. But who's to say, really? Who's to say when it comes to decisions like that? I thought Caleb Williams was going to be great this week, but nobody cares about my fantasy team. But for Justin Fields specifically, it was about like, can he sustain some of that like middle of the field, like a progression, but also the accuracy, the efficiency, like in this past week. And that was mostly the case. I mean, we saw Pat Freiermuth like get into the end zone and be a proficient like tight end. The same thing, like George Pickens, like still doing George Pickens things like on the boundary. So the passing game is still mostly intact. But now the question that we had, like coming into week 4, like would the rushing still be a part of it? Because from a scrambling, like design rushing rate, Justin Fields is looking to be more of that pocket passer, like for the first few weeks, like scrambling when he needed to, but really not taking off and having those boom types of week that we saw when he was still in Chicago. And lo and behold, like you give him the Colts like front 7 that has been like giving up like rushing production left, right, and center, like for the first like 3 weeks. And of course, now we get the 2 touchdowns like from Justin Fields. So yeah, I'm completely with you. Like with the way that Arthur Smith has really like reset Justin Fields like as a passer, if the rushing is there, similar to Jaden Daniels, we should be looking at Justin Fields like as a fantasy producer at the quarterback position for the rest of the season.
Charge, even if top 5 is maybe a bit of a, hyperbole going on here, at least over these next 2 weeks against a banged up Cowboys defense and then against a Max Crosby-less Raiders unit, Justin Fields certainly someone we're going to want to see in that starting lineup.
Who knew this show was going to turn into the Arthur Smith redemption show? Wow. Right? I mean, look at where we are right now. Top five is a little out of bounds right now, but top 10 certainly in play for Justin Fields. Neither his rushing or his passing is at an elite level. I think they're both tier 2 right now, which is tier 2 passing for Justin Fields is a huge win. The average passing game, 207 yards and 0.8 touchdowns per game. Not awesome. It's enough to just sort of keep you floating. The rushing's good. It's not awesome, but it's good. Tier 2 rushing. Again, not like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, but it's good enough. 2 rushing touchdowns yesterday, but on average giving you 36 rushing yards per game. Only 3.8 yards per carry, which is Gus Edwards bad. 3.8 yards per carry. I'd like it to be a little better than that. But here's what Arthur Smith's done. And let's give him credit. He has taken the mistakes out of Justin Fields' games. Fields, half the problem in Chicago is giving games away. He has 1 interception in 4 games, no fumbles. He's not making the mistakes that had torpedoed him in the past, and it was part of the reason we kept thinking Russell Wilson was going to be ultimately a factor here. Wilson's now on a path towards the world's slowest recovery from a calf injury. This looks like we're going to, as long as Justin Fields keeps doing what he's doing, he's going to stay the starter and he's going to stay highly fantasy relevant, but not at a top 5.
Fields has had 4 fumbles this year. Now, for him, that is still a low mark. And again, the 1 interception is what really is impressive, particularly considering came on a tip pass where it's kind of even hard to blame him for that in the first place. So, end of the day, guys, it's not exactly a new phenomenon to see Fields putting up big-time fantasy numbers. Since 2022, only quarterbacks averaging more fantasy points per game: Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow. Let's talk about a running back breakout that, let's face it, pretty much nobody saw coming. Chris, should we have never doubted DeAndre Swift? Because lordy, man, what a performance by the former Eagles and Lions running back in week 4.
I don't know about we should have never doubted him. I mean, there were at least some concerns from a film and tape evaluation standpoint where Swift wasn't really seeing like the necessary lanes in order for him to create. Like trying to bounce things outside when he could have like just taken like the interior lanes, like stuff like that has been a part of Swift's game, like even when he was like back in Detroit. But I would say that the other context of that was the Bears' offensive line. I mean, we were talking about the how poor the offensive linemen for Chicago were like a couple weeks ago as it related to Caleb Williams. I mean, Williams like seeing like pressure in his face like within a second after snapping the ball, so on and so forth. I mean, that also has to be some grace we give to a guy like DeAndre Swift. I mean, for the first 3 weeks of the season, the Bears' offensive line was averaging less than 1 yard like before contact like for their rushers. So it's like even if it was Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert, none of them were able to really get anything going on the ground. Last week or just yesterday against the Rams, like close to 2, like 1.8 yards before contact, like for the Bears. So now, are they going to always be in that type of situation, going up against a rushing defense that is, let's say, somewhat lacking, especially since they don't have Aaron Donald? Is that going to be the case for the Bears every week? No. But if they are given a chance in order to allow that line to gel, in order for like Caleb Williams to gain a bit more confidence to move them into scoring position, Could DeAndre Swift start to pick up a bit more fantasy production? It's certainly possible, but now just the rotation between him and Roschon Johnson, I mean, that should be something at least we keep in the back of our minds moving forward. But I'm not completely out on Swift after seeing at least some encouraging signs from the Bears offensive line.
As Chris mentioned, Charge, certainly an easy enough matchup against the Rams yesterday. That said, over these next 4 games, Panthers, Jaguars, Commanders, and the Cardinals for Caleb Williams and company. DeAndre Swift, someone you think you'll be squeezing into your top 20 running backs?
Look, we had good reason for doubting DeAndre Swift into this game. He was objectively awful through 3 games. And I think Chris is being too nice. You know, he alluded to the fact the Rams' run defense is terrible. They rank 28th in overall defense by Pro Football Focus. They're 28th in ESPN's run stuff win rate. This was it coming into the game. I just feel like DeAndre Swift found lightning in a bottle in a good game that happened to work out for him. I'm not ready to get back on board yet. You know, certainly he's going to keep the job for another week. I love the schedule, as you pointed out, which is like 4 straight game on opportunities here. And I love that Shane Waldron finally started throwing the ball at him. 7 targets last week, caught all 7. Those are all positives. I don't know, man. We all got burned on Swift in 3 straight starts. A lot of people lost their heads in guillotine leagues. I'm not ready to just one good game later go, oh, well, I guess I wasn't alive through weeks 1 and 3. I was dreaming that. He was terrible then, and I'm not ready to just forgive and forget yet. I can't do it. Chris is much more diplomatic than I am.
I'm too nice.
So you guys don't expect Swift to have more receiving yards than DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze combined moving forward every week? Come on, guys. Show some faith, guys.
Well, with Shane Waldron calling the plays, that's entirely possible.
Oh, my goodness. Bears now on the season, 5th fewest total yards. I tend to side with the idea that, yes, probably just saw the biggest game of the season for DeAndre Swift. But again, credit to him for pulling, that rabbit out of his head, as Jason Witten would say. All right, guys. Chris, let's go to, our resident Bengals expert right here. All my Chase Brown shares may actually be worth something. They certainly were in week 4 in that 2-touchdown performance.
Yes, and that's exactly what we were hoping for. Almost in the same conversation that we were having earlier between the touch split between who were we talking about earlier? The touch split between who are we talking about?
Jets,
earlier?
Bucks.
Oh, between the Bucks, between Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. But now, at least in this case, we knew Zach Moss was an efficient rusher, but we just needed more of the explosive gains from the Bengals backfield. And with the Cincinnati offensive line actually creating rushing lanes for either of the two. I mean, between Eric All showing out from a tight end, from a blocking perspective, and also having Amarius Mims out there as well. I mean, this team is actually allowing the lanes for Zach Moss to be productive, but Chase Brown, seeing some of it, looks like he's just been shot out of a cannon, but also being useful in the passing game, as well. So I'm thinking at least for right now, if you have Chase Brown rostered, similar to what Charch was saying earlier, that flex contingent value, I think that should be there from a week-to-week standpoint. Well, we do know that at least for Zach Moss, once they do get into those short yardage type situations, he's always going to be a part of the rotation. So it's not going to be one of those we think Chase Brown is going to take the job and completely run away with it. But still, the encouraging signs are there for Chase Brown moving forward.
Charge, I think similar to the point you made about Bucky Irving, it was especially encouraging with Chase Brown to see him get some of those goal line opportunities where, again, I don't think any of us are expecting Zach Moss to completely go away. But at a minimum, man, this looks far more like the 1A, 1B situation we were told it was going to be throughout the offseason. Yeah,
and to be clear, and Chris alluded to this, Zach Moss looks good too. I mean, this isn't always somebody has to suffer for somebody else to look good, right? Prior to yesterday, Chase Brown had never touched the ball from inside the 5 in his NFL career. And then he got the 2 carries, scored on both of them. That could end up being very meaningful here. Although Zach Moss can certainly carry from inside the 5 as well. Let me give you some Chase Brown stat dump. Here we go. Among runners with at least Chase Brown's 29 carries this year, he ranks number 1 in yards per carry at 6.3. He ranks 5th in first down rate, 31%, and he ranks number 1 in yards after contact. Chase Brown, this is having a lot of very tangible success, and he's certainly earned, what I think going, at least in the short term going forward, feels like it's going to be very close to a 50-50 split in Cincinnati.
And the really impressive thing with that, his longest run is 20 yards. This isn't almost like last year where he had that 70-yard screen for a touchdown that really inflated everything. Hey, we see the speed out there, guys. Like he has that in his, potential range of outcomes anytime he touches the football. But all those great stats Paul just said, yeah, he's doing that consistently. Great to see from the Bengals. Again, 1B running back. I think we can safely say that now. All right, guys, over in Kansas City, continuing to evolve. Kareem Hunt, maybe, just maybe, Chris, the new RB1 for the Chiefs?
It looks like it. I mean, Carson Steele fumbles early on in the game. We see Kareem Hunt come in and take away most of the touches, but then they're the touches that we would think would be more conducive to fantasy scoring. Now I know Samaje Perine did wind up getting one of the short yardage touches towards the back end of the game, but this should be in my opinion, this should be from a opportunity standpoint, Hunt's backfield moving forward. Patrick Mahomes, I think even after the game, highlighted the fact that Hunt's been here. He's been in this system. He knows how things should go, and not just in terms of how to actually work through the rushing concepts, but also being able to be there as a pass protector for Mahomes. So if we do have some concerns about what this target share is going to look like, not to say that Hunt is going to move into the Rashee Rice role. But if, to Charch's point earlier, if we've got over 30% of the targets up for grabs at this point, Kareem Hunt getting a few more of those, or taking a small piece of that 30% pie, I think that's definitely in the cards for Hunt, at least being a part of that Chiefs backfield rotation. I'm not even worried about I know folks were talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire potentially coming back and taking on some of that. I'm just not seeing that being a factor as of right now, with as well as Hunt played last week.
43% snaps was the high in the backfield. That said, Perine right there, 41%. Don't think Steele's completely out of the picture at 19% either. So, Charch, same kind of mood as Chris, not worried about the potential return of CEH?
No, I am. I think that is a complicating factor here. Talk about a guy who knows the offense. I mean, obviously he knows the offense. What we do know is that Clyde Edwards-Helaire won't be a workhorse. He hasn't had top 15 carries in 2 years, but is he going to water down an already messy backfield with Steele and Perine and Hunt and now Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Yeah, probably more than we want. And Hunt looked good. He didn't stun anybody yesterday. We saw him at 14 carries, and his workload increased throughout the game. We like that. I don't think it was not exactly dazzling. I just think this is going to be a frustrating backfield, and it's going to be more of a committee than we want it to be. We saw Hunt the last couple of years in Cleveland, honestly didn't look great, and he's unlikely to be better now than he was then. I just think he's at this stage of his career, Hunt's kind of just a guy, and I don't see him separating from the pack.
Let's move on from a disappointing, not so fun offense to talk about like the Chiefs and get into a really good one, guys. The Carolina Panthers, who randomly have the fourth most total yards in the NFL since turning the group over to Andy Dalton. So, Chris, Panthers offense led by, yes, that's right, the Red Rifle himself. Looks like they're not a fluke.
No, back-to-back weeks with over 350 scrimmage yards. I mean, it's not just the fact that we have Andy Dalton and Deontay Johnson. I mean, that was the bet that we made, especially given the ADP for Johnson, in the early-ish rounds. But now it's we have Xavier Legette being something of an interesting target. I mean, Jonathan Mingo being something of an interesting target. And of course, Chuba Hubbard being pulled along from a rushing standpoint. So hats off to Dalton at this point in his career, being able to, I guess, resuscitate yet another offense, because we saw him play well when he had the spot starts when he was down in New Orleans. And now actually create a fantasy friendly offense through the first 2 weeks. We thought we couldn't roster anybody from the Panthers. So yeah, I'm completely with the idea that if you have Deontay Johnson, of course, you're starting in week in and week out, but taking your chances or having a high waiver priority for guys like Xavier Legette. I mean, yeah, I'm definitely, and also of course, make sure you're stashing Jonathan Brooks for his potential return in the next couple of weeks as well. So I'm with at least investing in the Panthers offense at this point after 2 weeks.
Charge, seems like it's the year of the olds, man. We got Dalton and Flacco throwing touchdowns, Saquon, Kamara, Derrick Henry doing their things out there. Shout out Andy Dalton.
Let's do a Dalton data dump. You ready? In these two starts, Dalton ranks third in completions, second in touchdown passes, fourth in first downs, and 10th in passer rating. An amazing change of events for Carolina. But let me talk to you about this scenario, because I think this is absolutely on the table. 1 month from now, trade deadline. The Panthers
Bingo.
at that point are sitting like 2 wins, right? Maybe 3. They're not making the playoffs. Dalton could be a coveted commodity by some team that believes that they are playoff bound, and they're ready to make a move for Dalton. Now, let's just take, as a team that has quarterback need right now, Miami. How would Dalton look in Miami? I'm interested in that scenario. Maybe some other team that's going well right now gets an injury at quarterback. Where Dalton could end up really spiking is on his next team. And if you're Carolina, the trade would make sense, right? Because you're out of the playoffs. This would give you the second half of the season to put Bryce Young back in and then make a final determination on whether or not Bryce Young has any spot for Carolina in the future in a season that's probably not headed to the playoffs anyway. So Dalton, to me, gets really interesting as a stash for the second half to see if he ends up changing teams down the stretch and ends up in a really fascinating spot like maybe Miami.
Hey, we heard from Ian Rapoport, guys. Bryce Young was not benched, all right? He was just putting the time out. Huge difference going on in Carolina. Guys, time for some On the Chopping Block. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets instantly, and you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. Sports betting is not yet available in your state. Don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
Oh, look at that.
That was hot. Shout out to our
got some guillotine
graphics department
right there. I love it.
Yeah, man.
I love it.
Charge, speaking of chopping blocks, I am on the chopping block. We got some Monday night and honestly Monday morning sweats going on. Thanks in large part to Bears wide receiver. Why did I say Rams? Rome Odunze, 1 catch for 10 yards against the Rams after going for 112 yards and a touchdown last week. Rome Odunze, Charge, someone you would be interested to maybe acquire on the waiver wire.
I don't think so. Yeah, look, I'm optimistic about the long-term plan for Rome Odunze, but man, what we've seen so far, 3 pretty quiet games. Last week, 1 catch, 10 yards, as you mentioned, and coming off the 100-yarder before. This thing still feels like it's got a lot of variance to it. And that's the last thing we want in guillotine leagues. We want safe performers. Give me Khalil Shakir and his 6 catches for 60 yards every week, and I'm a happy guy. I don't want that level of variance. Starting Rome Odunze in a guillotine league is as dangerous as attending a PTA meeting at Diddy's house. I'm putting in a bid, if it's a free agent, of like $4 tops, and I'll just to play that thing out for a little bit and see how it goes.
All right, let's move right along from that one. Kyler Murray charged the QB20 this week. Cardinals now have gone for under 300 total yards in 3 of 4 games. Man, did they look good against the Rams, but the rest of the season, not so much. So how much fab would you be willing to go after with Matthew Berry's Mr. Ride or Die?
Yeah, an ignominious performance last week against objectively the worst secondary in the league by a mile. And you can't even blame the game script because they're passing the whole game, right? Blowout loss, everything else never came together. Just 3 rushing yards for Murray last week, just 142 passing yards. A lot of people going to get chopped with Kyler Murray, but still, he brings you a lot of ground air threats. Still really interested in him. I don't love road game coming up against San Francisco this week. That's not fantastic, but my first blush guillotine waiver bid for Kyler Murray, if he's available in your league, about $50. That's 5% of 1,000. Again, don't love the upcoming schedule here, but just feel like he can still be a big time fantasy point producer. We saw it just 2 weeks ago. I'd like to have him on my team, but I can't bid more than $50 on Kyler Murray.
Charch, last one. Someone who was considered maybe the 101 if we went ahead and drafted again just a few short weeks ago. Breece Hall, certainly someone that's going to send many people to their demise. How interested are you with him on the waiver wire?
Yeah, and we hit on all the Breece Hall stuff earlier in the show, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You know, almost an even split on carries, but not like Braylon Allen did anything last week either. But you do worry about that a little bit. Denver is turning out to be a pretty good defense, by the way. They've held their last 3 opponents to 9, 7, and 13 points. We got to start accounting for that, I think, a little more than we have. Look, Hall's going to feel like a coveted pickup, and he's going to go for a lot. But they've got to travel to London this week for a suddenly brutal matchup against Minnesota, one of the best run defenses in the league. Then they're going to fly back, and they're not going to take their bye. Instead, they're going to work that week, and they're going to play a Monday nighter against Buffalo, which is interesting. I don't love these matchups, even though Buffalo got run through last night. That was Derrick Henry. I don't know. I don't love these matchups for Breece Hall, who will probably go for like $200 or 20%. I'm at more like 7%, $70 out of 1,000. To me, the price is just too high for a player in an offense that is struggling, as we discussed earlier.
Gotta love those Guillotine League waiver wires. And again, guys, you can actually start a Guillotine League up anytime you want. Yeah, get it however many people you want in your league with however many weeks we have left, and get in on the action, already turning into one of my single favorite ways to play fantasy football. So, guys, that was the chopping block. But now, let's get off the rails.
Oh, look at that. Choo-choo,
For
my
those
man.
unfamiliar, as Chris gets his, shout out Bobby from The Sopranos train conductor hat on, Paul had a little bit of a, I don't want to say mean-spirited, some fun Drake and joshing around at Chris's expense about his train set. So now here we are off the rails, giving Chris a chance to get back in the limelight and maybe give us a take that could be perceived as off the rails, Chris, but maybe, just maybe, what's going on. So take it away, conductor Chris.
All right, so I'm back in on this Packers wide receiver group. All right, Jordan Love back, over 350 passing yards last week, and I know he had like the game script in order to do it, going up against the Vikings, like Chargers Vikings, who were just completely trouncing them, like through at least like the first half to 3/4 of the game. But Packers have another good matchup this week. They're playing against the Rams, like traveling to California to go up against like Matthew Stafford, and also the defense that has allowed at least a ton of production like to opposing passing games over the past like few weeks. I'm with Dontavian Wicks on this one. The Christian, like we were talking earlier, Christian Watson having the high ankle sprain. Denny Carter will probably say it's the highest ankle sprain like ever recorded in history. But for the production for Wicks specifically, he was the wide receiver 2 just this past week. I mean, over 20% of the team's over 20% of the team's targets, 30% of the team's air yards. But more importantly, he was also out there in 2 tight end sets, considering that is a thing that the Packers like to do. Over 20% of their plays just this past week with 2 tight ends out there on the field. So if we've got the snap share for Dontavian Wicks, we certainly have the production and efficiency. I'm calling 100 yards and a touchdown for Wicks this upcoming week for week 5. I'm on it. Count it here. We're off the rails like as it is right now for the Packers like wide receiver group. And I think for at least any of them, it's going to be Wicks that's the beneficiary of Watson being out.
Love the call, conductor Chris. Going up against that Rams 31st ranked scoring defense certainly seems like a smash spot. So that's going to do it from us today. Choo indeed. And want to thank you guys for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. Myself and Dwayne McFarland will be back tomorrow breaking down the utilization and sheesh reports. Talk about a great day to be great there. So for Charch, for Chris, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning to the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.